for my imaginary ozone sampler, I'm going to download the sampling methodology file from AQS and import it into the toolbox. For my PM2.5 sampler and my metadata, I'm going to manually enter the AQS sampling methodologies. So I have already downloaded my monitor protocol data from AQS for my ozone sampler, and all of those steps are illustrated in the notes document with screen captures and everything. Or if you prefer, they are also in the SOP that you can get to by clicking here. Or if you want, we can help you with the process. It's not that hard at all, and I've done it many times before, so I would be more than happy to help you with that. When I went into AQS and downloaded my monitor protocol data, I told the AQS site to put it into my Tribal Data Toolbox folder. So let's go into my Tribal Data Toolbox folder, and this is the file from AQS. So to get the file out of AQS, you run what's called the AMP500 report, and it outputs this text file, and it asks you where do you want to save it, and you say put it in my Tribal Data Toolbox 3.0 folder, and this is how it looks when it comes in. So let's open it up and take a look at how it looks. This is how mine looks. You might have a whole bunch of rows in your file if you have a bunch of samplers, like you have an ozone sampler and a PM10 sampler and a PM2.5 sampler. I'm just looking at my ozone sampler, so I only have one row. And this top row explains what each of these columns are, and then this last row is just junk that we need to get out because the toolbox is not going to like that. So the first thing I want to do is rename my file. This process is kind of like when you do a new import.txt import into the toolbox, in that you have to name the file something very specific, and it needs to be saved exactly in your Tribal Data Toolbox version 3.0 folder. Otherwise, the toolbox can never find this file. So the first thing we want to do is rename it. So I am going to right-click on it and select Rename. And what you want to rename it to is just MK. So I'm going to type in MK and then enter on my keyboard. So now the file is correctly named and it's in the correct location, which is my Tribal Data Toolbox version 3.0 folder. So I'm going to open this up again, and I need to take out this last row here. If I don't take this out, the toolbox treats this as data, and you don't want that. So I am going just to delete that last row where it tells me how many records were written. So I'm going to highlight that and then press the delete key on my keyboard. And if in fact that you get a file back from AQS and it only has this number and these column headers and nothing after it, that means that you don't have any monitor protocol data in AQS, and you need to enter that data into the toolbox instead of downloading it from AQS and importing it. And we'll demonstrate that for PM2.5 and MET. I also want to get out my super useful database logbook. Since I'm going to be importing this data into the toolbox, I want to write down how many rows are in my mk.txt file. In my file, I only have one record, so I write down 1 in my database logbook. And I am going to save this file now. So I click File Save, and I'm going to close this file. So I'm going back in the toolbox, and I am going to click on the Import Monitor Protocol Data from AQS because I want to import that data file into the toolbox. So I click on that first button, and we get this form. And this is a data import form, just kind of like the new import.txt file. It kind of follows the same steps, but in a much smaller fashion. So the first thing on this form is this text box that tells me what my file is supposed to be named and where it's supposed to be saved. So the first thing I want to do is go through these steps. So I want to import the text file first. And I get this import successful box, which is what I want to see, so I click OK on that. So the first thing that happens, just like when you import a new import.txt file, is that the monitor protocol data goes into a temporary table. And then we transfer them to a permanent table, and we delete the temporary table. So right now, they're in the temporary table. So I click OK, and now I'm going to inspect the temporary import table. So I want to look to see if there's anything odd here, like blank rows or weird symbols or anything like that. And if all of your columns aren't shown on your screen, you can use the horizontal scroll bar to see all of your columns. Mine are all shown. And you'll notice here that the last 3 columns, which is the sampling frequency, composite type, and alternate method detectable limit, are empty. And that is likely going to be the case in your mk.txt file also, and that's okay. So just expect to see these as being blinked. Another thing you need to do here is verify from your database logbook that the number of records in the temporary table match the number of records in the mk.txt file that you imported. Mine only had 1, so I noticed on the left-hand side of the screen that there is only 1 record in this table, and that is correct, so I'm good there. So now I can close this table by clicking on the lower X right here. So I will do that, and I need to go to the next button, which is the Setup Transfer from Temporary to Permanent Table button. Now when I click on this button, I'm going to get that query design grid like I did when I did the field mapping step for my new import.txt file. However, this is very exciting. All these fields are filled in, so I don't have to go through and append to every single row. This is all filled in for me. The reason that this is all filled in for you is because everyone's mk.txt file has the same format because it's coming from AQS. Unlike everyone's new import.txt file, which is always different because everyone has different data loggers and samplers. So this process is much easier for your mk.txt file. So if I scroll to the right, I see that all of the append to rows are populated, so that is good. There is one that's not populated, and that's the active column right here. That is okay because the active column is used for internal purposes in the toolbox, and there should be nothing in that field. So more than likely, you don't need to do anything here. This is just for you to check that everything looks good, and in this case it does. So I will close the query by clicking on this X, the lower X, and now I want to go to the next step, which is copying the sampling methodology codes from the temporary table to the permanent table. So I'm going to click on the transfer data from temporary to permanent table button. So I get this message box that says I'm about to run an append query, and remember, an append query just means it's adding records to a table. So I click yes. And then you want to confirm in your database logbook that there is the same number of rows being appended that were in the mk.txt file. So in my case, that's 1, which is correct. So I click yes. And now we're going to look at the permanent table, which is the permanent home of the the monitor protocol data. Okay. So yeah, there's 1 record. This looked a little strange to me, but this is only because this would be for a new record. So see how there's that little asterisk here? That means that this is a new record, but there is only 1 record actually with data in this file, and that's on the left-hand side of the screen. It says 1 of 1, which is what you want because that matches what was in my mk.txt file. So that's good, and I don't see anything missing that should have been put in there, like the sampling frequency, composite type, and alternate method. They were in my mk.txt file, and so they should be empty here as well, which they are, so that's fine. So everything looks good. Looks like it transferred to the permanent archive table, and everything looks perfect, so I can close the query by clicking on the lower X button. And now that I've made them a permanent home in the toolbox, I can delete the temporary import table. So I will do that by clicking on that final button. And now you don't see much happening. That's because the toolbox did this very quickly and it doesn't give you any message box. So that's done. That temporary import table is gone, and now the monitor protocol data have been permanently put into the toolbox for my ozone sampler. So if that was the only sampling methodology I had to add, I could click on the Continue to Create AQS Data Files form, and that would allow me to start work on generating my AQS ready file with the toolbox. But I still have PM 2.5 and net methodologies to add, so I am going to click on the exit form button to close this form. More than likely, you probably only need to use one of these processes. If you had one sampler that you have already been submitted to AQS and you had a new sampler that you haven't submitted to AQS, you would use both of the processes. If you usually are going to only use one of these processes.